Hey everyone, welcome to this live stream from Savvy where Maggie Campbell is going to teach us all about terroir at the cellar, barrel aging. I'm really excited about this. My name is Will Hookinga from American Rum Report. As I said, I'm here with Maggie Campbell, who you can see right now. I'll give a more formal introduction in a moment, Maggie, but how are you today? Where are you joining us from?
I'm doing well today. Today's a good one. I'm joining from Ipswich, Massachusetts. As you guys all know, we're in the middle of the crisis that's happening, so I'm glad to be here with you guys online.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to get started in just a second. Before we dive in, I wanted to run through the agenda real quick with everyone. So if you look on your screen to the right, you probably see the chat right now. We've got people coming in: Venezuela, Oregon, Portland, Maine, Toronto. Yeah, let us know where you're from. It's so cool to see everyone from all over the world right now in a challenging time coming together to hang out and learn about rum. So also, we're going to do some Q&A, 10 to 20 minutes at the end, depending on how much time we have. So if you have questions for Maggie, whenever you think of them throughout the presentation, there's a question box you'll see at the bottom of your screen. Go ahead and enter them there, and we'll save them. We'll run through them at the end of the presentation. We're going to spend about 30 to 40 minutes on the main presentation. And as I said, 10 to 20 on Q&A. But for now, I want to introduce Maggie a little bit. So Maggie is the President and Head Distiller at Privateer Rum, as she said, in Ipswich, Massachusetts. Maggie, you're also Vice President of American Craft Spirits Association. I know you've worked with brandy, whiskey, rum, have a lot of qualifications and expertise with wine as well, which is why I always love talking to you about spirits, because you bring such a well-rounded perspective to it. Can you give people just a snapshot of your time at Privateer, the rum y'all make there, and what you've got going on now?
Yeah, absolutely. Privateer was started in 2011, and I joined them about 10 months after they were founded in 2012. We focus on rum, and coming from my wine background, I was really passionate about minimalism in production. And, for me, unfiltered, unsweetened, no artificial coloring or oak flavoring or age flavoring or essences, just spirit, water, time guided into the bottle, and trying to have that harmonious and complex flavor with like a gentle hand. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, so we focus mainly on rum, and we do some fun projects on the side too.
Excellent. So I'm really excited about the topic. I knew when I talked to you about doing a live stream that there were all sorts of stuff that you could talk about, but I've heard you talk about aging before, and you really, changed my perspective on it a lot. And just that there's so much that goes into it that I think the average person like myself, or uh, spirits consumers don't realize is going on in the background. So I'm really excited about this topic, and yeah, just really looking forward to it.
Great, thanks. I'm glad for that. And I we'll keep it kind of short for 40 minutes, but this is something I love to talk about a lot. And I know some of you folks joined us in Miami at Rumfest and got to see me talk as well. So hopefully we'll add enough depth and detail with a little bit more time that I've got. I've also added some of my own photos from different experiences as well that can kind of help illustrate the point as well. So hopefully it's valuable for you guys who've seen a little bit of this before as well. So yeah.
Yeah, I think there's always new layers to peel back with a topic like this that has so many different facets and things like that. So yeah, terroir of the cellar. Where for I know terroir is a wine term. How does it change, if at all, when talking about it relative to spirits?
Yeah. So um, terroir sort of encapsulates, in my mind, and also sort of from the point of view of the use of the word, tasting the place, and that taste of place. And so, climate, geography, culture, and know-how all tie into this. And I saw a lot of spirits articles coming out about terroir and spirits that were solely based on the raw ingredients. And though I
Right.
think that's really important, and we're very proud of all of our single origin molasses we use, when you age something in a cellar, there's terroir to that. And so in wine, I would study how in the town of Meursault, they had a very high water table, so they couldn't dig their cellars very deep. So their barrel fermented wines are warmer in the cellar and it changes the flavor. And that's how you can tell you're tasting a wine from there. And that's one part of why you can tell you're tasting a wine from there. Whereas
Right.
another village like Chablis, they have very deep cellars. It's very cold. It's further north. And as those barrels age, they taste very different. And so for me, when I, would taste spirits with sort of an eye for the same thing, of course, like those same signatures are there. And I think, you can take a knowledge you have of spirits to help you understand wine, and you can take an understanding of wine that helps you to understand spirits. And it can make you an expert at things like much more quickly. And so I started to see all these connections between these different cellars, and we'll talk a little bit about it as we go along. But,
Yeah.
there's the terroir of the cellar. How does it being in that place with those people in that moment makes it taste like something it couldn't taste like if it was anywhere else?
Right. And I think one of the interesting things is, looking at Privateer's products. I think y'all have been very intentional about communicating the place where the products come from. Having New England on the label, and everything like that. It really gives you a sense of place just looking at the bottle, first of all, and that I think seems like a natural product of the fact that you focus on the plates and the place in the production of everything.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I think that we have special bottlings called like North Atlantic Maritime, which is sort of an ode to our macroclimate.
Hmm.
Yeah, the New England, and being very clear that it just tastes different than something you would get aged somewhere else. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the confusion in rub around where it's aged and the flavor it gives.
Yeah.
I really like that Foursquare and Hampton are, aged there. Whereas a brand that might say Jamaica might actually be aged in Europe and not have
Right.
tropical aging and not have those characters. And it just means that they're all different. And you should
Hmm.
just, like Richard Seal says, it's like his mantra, drink what you love, know what you're drinking. And this is just
Right.
another way to understand spirits and understand what you're tasting and why.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Um, yeah, so it looks like we're looking at a variety of aging vessels here. So
Yeah.
that's probably a natural place to talk about the cellar is what the spirits are being put into.
Absolutely. So that top left photo, the very large barrel with the red ring around it, that's sort of a classic Italian botti. They're often made of a number of different woods, and that's one at the Privateer Cellars. And you'll see botti sometimes made from chestnut or other woods. Oftentimes, so like chestnut would give like an incredibly harsh tannin, so it would be paraffin wax lined. Oftentimes to kind of keep the
Oh,
spirit or whatever was aging in it from coming into contact. I think people don't always know that. So,
interesting.
uh, and then you can see those concrete amphorae. There's some really cool spirits being made that way, being aged in earthenware. And if you see on the bottom left, that's a Baiju producer, a very, very,
Oh,
very, very
wow.
scale producer. And you can see they're going right into a clay pot. And that one's a very small clay pot, whereas those concrete amphoras on the top right corner are huge. To give you an idea, those have got to be 10 feet tall,
Wow.
really large. And then that middle photo at the bottom, those are some incredibly large holding tanks. So sometimes when I think one of the cool thing about the Barbados GI is they want aging to be aging in a barrel, like you would see in the bottom right corner.
Hmm.
A barrel, as people understand it, when consumers see aged, they think it's always in a barrel like that, but that's not always true. Sometimes aging is done in these really, really large vats, which is more like holding rather than aging. So that's
Right.
always something to be aware of too. And I really like that that's in the Barbados GI that it needs to be aged in barrel. It doesn't mean you can't pull into one of these tanks for blending and then rebarreling, but it means that it's not aging in one of those tanks. So yeah, so I think that kind of shows a wide variety. And I often say that a lot of the flavor definition on the palate can deal a lot with how it was aged. And a lot of that is how much volume is in the container and what the container is made of, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a really small oak barrel, like in the bottom right corner, you're going to have a lot of skin of the barrel, so a lot of surface area to the volume that's in that cask. Whereas if you see the Brilliant cask at Privateer, we would probably use that. We will be using that to marry and finish a blend as opposed to aging, because the amount of surface area of oxygen you would get to the volume in there would be so small that would actually show the effects of oxidation at a much slower rate. So
Mm.
it would not necessarily show the flavors of maturity as nearly as quickly as one of these smaller 53-gallon casks. And it would also impart a lot less character, very, very light and subtle character. So when I was working at Germain-Robin, we used 92-gallon casks, which are about twice the size of what we use at Privateer, which are the standard, 52, 53-gallon casks. And it, Corey, who's on here, who's come to watch, he was sort of asking me about a product recently. And, I knew it had been aged in a much larger cask, about that larger sort of classic style, around 92 gallons. And I kind of said, oh, 5 years is pretty short, just a heads up.
Mm.
And like that feels really counterintuitive because 5 years isn't that short. But, I think there's a lot more time needed for the complexity. And you see this in wine too. Wine that's bottled in a small bottle ages at twice the rate of one that's twice the size. And that's because you have so much liquid for that little bit of the ullage. So ullage being the gap between how full it is and where the liquid is of oxygen interaction with the wine. So that kind of, it's not that it ages more slowly or ages more quickly. It's showing the effects of certain things at a different rate. So the size of vessel you're in can really impact that effect. Obviously, we see people use those really, really tiny 5-gallon barrels.
Mm-hmm.
I won't work with those at Privateer. I find the wood that they're made from typically is not the quality of wood I'm looking for. It's, we work with outdoor air seasoned wood, which is a whole discussion there about impacting flavor. The terroir of where the wood was seasoned for the barrel is a part of the flavor of what we get. Ours are all done in America. When we get new oak barrels, they're outdoor aged in America, 24 to 36 months. But yeah, when you get those super small oak barrels, you're going to get a lot of oak flavor before you get any flavor of maturity.
Right.
Flavor of maturity is going to show terroir because it's going to show flavors of the cellar, aromas of the cellar, temperature, and all of these things, which we'll get into. The large, super large concrete tanks, they're going to have little micro texture on the inside holding little oxygen bubbles. So that's going to kind of give you a different flavor as well. I do just notice what we call like a geosmin or geosmin, like a mineral clay flavor. From that, if you think about spirits, they're a solvent. They absorb any flavor they come into contact with. So if you put a cinnamon stick in a bottle of spirit, it's going to taste like cinnamon. And if you surround a liquid with the aroma of your cellar, in time, it will subtly show that aroma. If you're next to, a paint factory, that's really going to affect the aroma of your cellar.
Wow.
At Privateer, we're very careful. We only use food safe ink to number our barrels. And, we don't paint any of our barrel heads because it's going to absorb the flavor of anything it comes into contact with. When I worked at Germain-Robin, we were really, really fanatical about aromas in the cellar. And, here at Privateer, no one can wear scented lotion. No one can use like scented laundry detergent. Like, it's
Wow.
really important. So that's part of the flavor that is imparted in the cellar is what is the regional character of what you age in. What is the cultural character of what you age in? You know, in Mexico, they might be aging in clay. In parts of Asia, they might be aging in clay. In parts of the Black Forest, they might be aging in clay or in glass. Here in
Mm.
the US, it's a lot of these 53-gallon oak barrels. And in the Caribbean with rum, it's a lot of used 53-gallon oak barrels. And all of you taste it, it's going to give it a little bit of a sense of place. And so, you know, the material is important, the size is important. How many generations? You know, our rum is kind of unapologetic about having a little more new oak spice to it
Hmm.
than a lot of Caribbean, because that would be very American in flavor, where the timber was grown and used. And then, of course, entry proof. So, entry proof is definitely going to be a cultural characteristic that's going to absolutely impact the flavor of the spirit. So, here in the US, 125 entry proof. So, for people who are listening internationally, in the US, proof 125 is twice the ABV, unlike in Europe. Where it's the same. So just a heads up there. But the proof that you go into barrel at, it does a couple things. Number one, it's the strength of how solvent it is. So how much flavor it's going to absorb. If you put a cinnamon stick in 151 rum, it's going to taste like cinnamon really fast.
Yeah.
Whereas if you put it in 80 proof, it's going to taste like cinnamon more slowly. And the cinnamon on the 151 might be a little more bitter and more extracted, whereas the cinnamon that went into the 80 proof, it's probably not going to extract as deep and it's not going to be as bitter, but more floral and aromatic. And so they're just going to be different. So in the US, standard is typically 125 proof. At Privateer, we go in at 110 proof, so 55% alcohol, because we want to get a slow and even extraction of that oak. We don't want to over extract the new oak. And the strength of alcohol will also make it more stable and change the way it interacts with oxygen and with the maturing process. So for us, you know, being down at 110, I guess first I should say, you know how a bottle of port lasts longer than a bottle of Pinot Grigio? It's
Right.
because the alcohol is very stabilizing in the port because it's higher. It's like, yeah, much higher, 19-20% ABV as opposed to like 8%. So the higher it is, the more it's slowing down the chemical interactions that are happening. It's a natural like chemical retardant. It's going to slow it down. So for us going in that lower proof, we're going to extract less powerful oak flavors, more subtle oak flavors, and we're going to accelerate the rate of oxidation and esterification. So esterification being, you know, one still the spirit and it's aging, you have organic acidity that came over in distillation. You have oxygen and you have alcohol, and the way they're all interacting together to create new aromas, to join together molecularly and break apart into these long chains based on fat acids. That will give you more and more complexity. So people often think like, oh, a spirit is perfectly stable, it's never changing. That's not true. It's just more slowly. And the higher that alcohol, the more slowly that's happening. So for us, with our entry proof, um, you know, we've got like a pretty good rate of that oxidation going on, which of course will tie into climate, right? Will
Right.
you take the head?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So that'll tie into climate, right? So we have this beautiful photo of Foursquare, gorgeous open windows. Totally stole it from Richard from when we did this together. I only wish the US government would allow me to have windows like that. Oh, it'd be amazing. And yeah,
Why are windows like that not allowed?
so it would just be like for us, it's a federally bonded warehouse. So this gets a little too like inside baseball, but like the federal government actually approves our security because we owe them so much money in taxes for what's already in barrel. They have to make sure that
Ah,
money is secured.
okay.
So we have really strict security protocols. So you'll see around the top of our barrel room, which is the photo on the right,
Hmm.
that is all like a plexiglass, so it's
Okay.
sealed in. Whereas Richards is fresh air, and you know Hubert Germain Robin would say, no, you absolutely have to close the whole thing in. Um, You have to black out all the windows. You have to make the air perfectly still and dark because you want to grow these special molds.
Hmm.
Whereas like in Barbados, they have like fresh air, which I actually really love. I think it's great. I think it really brings in the natural aroma in the area. I think that's really good, but don't tell Uber I said that.
Hopefully he's
And
not
so,
here.
right. So that's a very, very old photo of our cellar. We've actually blacked out all those windows. But we still do roll up our roll top doors, especially during storms. We really love that stormy. When you're here on the East Coast and the storm rolls in fresh from the ocean, you get like that salty water in your mouth. Like it smells great.
Yeah.
And so we always roll up our doors for that. We had a new employee a few years ago, and the first storm we went around and opened all the doors, and he was like, "Oh, wait, we actually do that?" And I was like, "Yeah, we actually do that." So yeah, it's been changed a little since then. But you'll see, so we go in at 110 proof, whereas a lot of my peers in the Caribbean will share they go in at a much higher proof. But there's a couple things happening here. It's much colder in Massachusetts, right? So the cooler something is, the more slowed down the rate of the chemical interaction. And heat is an accelerant. So in a much higher proof. I've had some friends tell me like 160, 140. 140 seems to be a lot more common, to be clear.
Hmm.
Um, they're much more stable alcohol. It's going to, in a perfect environment, it would, oxidize and esterify much more slowly than us. But because it's very warm, that's counteracting that higher proof slightly. And going to accelerate those chemical interactions that the higher alcohol is slowing down. So you have two things happening at once. Whereas we have the much colder temperatures slowing things down, but we go in at a much lower proof, which is going to allow that to happen faster.
Hmm.
So there's all these different things that are going on in barrel.